Bodybuilding has come a long way from the bubble gods that plagued the Mr. Olympia stage for over 2 decades. This distended midsection phenomenon, which began in the 90s, nearly ruined the sport before it finally started to disappear. Let's hope it's gone for good. In this video, we'll count down 10 of the worst cases of bubble gut at Mr. Olympia, focusing on top-tier competitors. This wasn't about rare flukes but the sport's biggest names, where judges rewarded physiques with distended guts, setting a dangerous standard for the industry. At the 1994 Mr. Olympia, Dorian Yates entered as the heavy favorite, having showcased one of the most impressive physiques ever just a year earlier. However, weeks before the competition, he suffered a career-threatening left biceps tear. The injury derailed his prep, and the effects were evident on stage. So, Dorian Yates in 1994 earns our first honorable mention for bubble gut among top-tier bodybuilders in this countdown. It also marks the first official case of a distended midsection, though it seemed isolated at the time, with a valid excuse due to his injury. For our number 10 in the list, we have the guy who basically put an end to the bubble gut era, Shawn Rhoden, who in 2018 ended the 7-year reign of Phil Heath, marked by a distended midsection in his later wins. Even though Shawn beat Phil in 2018 mainly because of the midsection and the abdominals just a year prior, in 2017 Shawn Rhoden was sporting his own bubble gut. After placing on the podium for several years, Shawn was relegated to 5th in 2017 for having a distended waist himself. 2017 is remembered for the fact that almost everyone on stage had a gut. Even though Shawn Rhoden is the one who basically ended the bubble gut era, he opens our list in 10th place with his 2017 physique. In number 9, we have the only top bodybuilder of today that seems out of sync with the new era, Nick the Mutant Walker. Now, those who are following me, you know he's my favorite bodybuilder of today. Even though he's got a blocky waist, he usually keeps his midsection in very good control, even sporting some great abdominals. However, at the last show he did, the 2024 New York Pro, as well as his guest posing 1 week earlier at the Pittsburgh Pro, he showed clear signs of a distended gut. Since this was basically the first time he showed that on stage, it was ignored and he went on to win the show. But I have a feeling it won't be tolerated a second time, and I really hope he fixes the issue. He could learn from our 8th place on the list, Rolly the Beast Winkler. Rolly is probably one of the most famous cases of bubble guts in history. With his notorious Arnold Classic 2015 presentation, he had one of the most infamous bubble gut pictures in bodybuilding, still used in videos, presentations, and thumbnails everywhere. See the case of this video's thumbnail as well. Nick Walker needs to learn from him because Rolly went on to fix his issue, to the point where his waist and midsection became a strong point for him, especially during his best year in the 2018 season, which culminated with him finishing top 3 at the Mr. Olympia, his best placing. In 7th place we have Marcus Rule, and I can't pinpoint a certain relevant show exactly. However, he is the perfect representation of the phenomenon, which explains a lot. The distended midsection is mainly caused, among other factors, by bodybuilders getting too big. Excessive drug use, excessive eating, and excessive training with heavy weights all contributed to growing the midsection. Marcus Rule, as the most impressive mass monster of all time, had to pay this price to get to that level. So in a way, this is the compromise if we want to see the freakiest mass monsters on stage for our entertainment. In 6th place, we have Dexter Jackson, a bodybuilder who for most of his career was an example of an aesthetic physique during the mass monster era. However, by the end of his career, and since basically everyone else had a gut at the time, Dexter was no exception. He showcased what became the turtle shell midsection deep into his 40s, but maybe that's understandable for an athlete being on top of bodybuilding for 2 straight decades. Before we continue, if you are enjoying this, please hit that subscribe button as I'm aiming for that 30k subs milestone. In 5th place, we have Dorian Yates, the original mass monster and quite possibly the original bubble gutter, with his 1997 Mr. Olympia physique. We should all know the story by now. After his horrible injury in 1994, he found a way to live with it and win again. But by the 1997 season, everything went downhill for him. His body finally started to give up after all those years of high-intensity training that he made famous. When he entered the 1997 Olympia, he had, besides the torn biceps, a torn triceps, an almost torn shoulder, and a torn quad. He went on record saying he had a blood transfusion prior to the Olympia due to complications. All this contributed to Dorian having the first real case of a bubble gut at the 1997 Olympia, which he won, basically kickstarting the bubble gut era. In 4th place, we have the Predator, Kai Green, with his 2014 physique. 2014 was the year when Kai was the closest to winning the Olympia. Also because his greatest rival Phil Heath rocked his own bubble gut. But Kai failed to fully capitalize on that since he had his own problems with distension. Maybe it wasn't as obvious as Phil Heath's during transitions and in between poses, but Kai kept showing a gut even during poses, most famously his side chest pose, which I never understood why he hit like that. And since we're here in 3rd place, we have Phil Heath at the same show who had an even worse case of bubble gut. Since we're using this term so lightly, I should mention that Louis Marco coined the term bubble gut, addressing Phil Heath himself after this show, I believe. I'm not trying to use this term disrespectfully. It has its place in the history of the sport, and I will not avoid it just to not upset someone. Anyway, I have to mention that Phil had an actual health condition regarding his hernia, and from 2014 onward, it overshadowed his rather perfect physique everywhere else. In 2nd place, we have the greatest of all time himself. I know all of you were expecting this. Ronnie Corman was so great that you basically couldn't penalize his gut on stage. He was so big, full and dry everywhere else that when standing next to everyone, he couldn't be considered a loser, even though his midsection looked really distended for several years. For example, at the 2003 Mr. Olympia, arguably the most dominant physique in history. However, my choice for him in this list is the 2004 Mr. Olympia, where he was even heavier than in 2003, but probably because he had an even bigger gut. As everywhere else, he didn't look bigger than in 2003. For honorable mentions, I should mention probably the 2 most famous bodybuilders for their guts. One is Dave Palumbo, who actually lent his name to the condition of Polumboism, which some experts claim is the leading cause of a distended midsection. Also, we couldn't make this list without mentioning the one and only Big Lenny. However, this list is about top-tier Mr. Olympia competitors, so number 1 on our list is Phil Heath again with his 2017 Mr. Olympia physique. For the record, Phil, if you're watching this, you're actually my favorite bodybuilder of all time, but this is the truth. In 2017, Phil was probably at his all-time best. Aside from the midsection, he was big, full and defined. It's a real pity he had that hernia condition that ruined his physique. Not only did he have a distended midsection, but the shape of his abs changed as well, and he also had that herniated belly button, which all contributed to him making number 1 on this list today. And that wraps up our countdown of the top 10 worst cases of bubble guts in bodybuilding history by top tier bodybuilders.